Inside the chaos that engulfed Ohio's postponed primary election, just one of the stories you'll find in the latest edition of Capital Letter, the daily newsletter from cleveland.com. Andrew Tobias is the reporter on that story, and he joins me now via Skype to discuss. Andrew, good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Governor DeWine did an interview on Meet the Press Sunday, and he said the election was going forward and that people just needed to be careful. Then your reporting finds out that everything started to change Monday morning. What's the backstory?
So basically, they got additional guidance from the federal CDC. They set the maximum safe limit for recommended limit for public events at 50 or less. And they felt, whereas before the number was 100, and they felt that under those conditions, among some other things, that they could no longer guarantee that they could have a safe election, especially for population 65 and older, who may be more vulnerable and other more vulnerable populations. And they said that's a pretty big part of the electorate, as well as the poll workers that show up. So they essentially looked into it, and Governor DeWine sought to see if he could move the election, and they decided he didn't have the authority to do that. So they basically asked a couple of residents, 65 and older, who said they were concerned about their health, and asked them to file a lawsuit, basically arguing that a judge moved the election, and the state said they would support it and wouldn't oppose it.
So that lawsuit gets filed at 5 p.m. Monday evening, and after the courts have closed, of course. Then perhaps in another stroke of bad luck, it randomly winds up in the courtroom of Richard Fry. Why was that significant?
So the case was randomly assigned, and Judge Fry in the past has issued some rulings that basically went against the state. In 2016, for example, he ruled that Ohio should allow 17-year-olds to vote. And it's not to say it's the right or wrong answer, but he's independent-minded. My colleagues talked to him. He's somebody who is described as wanting to follow the law and isn't afraid to issue tough decisions. So I think that they felt that maybe the judge would be under a lot of pressure and would have to pass it, and he didn't.
On top of everything else that didn't go DeWine's way, the national media, not the local, but the national media, got it wrong. That added to some confusion. Tell us what happened there.
So while the court proceedings were still going on, some media outlets reported the opposite. So I guess also the judge hadn't made the ruling yet, but he ultimately ended up denying it, and the report went out that they accepted it. So some state officials saw those reports and ran with them and started communicating that to the local level. Some poll workers started getting calls to tell them not to show, or that the election, to not show up the next day. And in fact, the opposite had happened. And so it was just complete chaos. I was getting calls from people all around the state trying to figure out what was going on.
And adding to all of that confusion, House Speaker Larry Householder, a Republican, then puts his 2 cents in.
Yeah, he essentially told the Republican members of the House that the election was happening, and told them to tell their constituents that. And so that's just more ways that bad information was getting out and making its way into the public.
So Dr. Amy Acton steps in and she says, okay, this is a health emergency, no election. Then everyone, with the exception of perhaps you and a few others, goes to bed. What happens in the wee hours of the morning Tuesday?
So somebody had filed a lawsuit with the Supreme Court. They initially weren't going to hear it because the judge in Franklin County decided the election would go on. After the order came out, they decided, hey, we actually have to have a late midnight plus session. So they gave the state until 1:30 a.m. to answer, and they ended up ruling at 4 a.m., so just 2.5 hours before the poll was supposed to open, that the election, in fact, would be postponed. So it was just a very light night for the people who were following it.
What happens now?
So the polls didn't open this morning. Secretary of State Frank LaRose has instructed counties to prepare for a June 2nd election. We have the threat of litigation from people who are going to challenge the process through which this happened, which is very irregular. House Speaker Larry Householder has said he wants to convene the legislature to pick a date. So there's political stuff, there's legal stuff, and I think that it's just really up in the air right now.
Andrew Tobias with cleveland.com. Andrew, some great reporting there.
Thank you.
And don't forget, if you would like Capital Letter delivered to your mailbox each morning, just go to cleveland.com/Capital Letter.